Good afternoon. Despite the substantive contributions of women to address the COVID-19 crisis in the Western Balkans, the pandemic exacerbates gender inequalities, with disparities seen in health, economic security, unpaid care work and access to livelihoods, the digital divide, and more. Given the pandemic's impacts on women's economic empowerment, the Regional Cooperation Council and the United Nations Development Programme are launching an initiative, Women's Economic Empowerment, Areas for Joint Action in the Western Balkans. So welcome to this virtual launch event of this wonderful initiative. At this launch event, the RCC and the UNDP will share trends and analysis on COVID-19 impacts on women's economic empowerment and gender equality in the Western Balkans, and discuss the way forward in a high-level panel with government representatives, academia, and civil society. My name is Milena Lazarevic. I'm Program Director of Belgrade-based think tank European Policy Center, CEP, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon. It is really my true pleasure to welcome everybody to this event. So without further ado, I would like us to start with some introductory remarks, setting the scene, setting the tone of conversation with several high-level officials. So allow me to first give the word to Ms. Mirjana Spoljarić-Eger, Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States from the UNDP. Ms. Mirjana Spoljarić-Eger, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues and friends. Good morning and greetings from New York. On behalf of UNDP, I'm both honored and very proud to welcome you to the launch of this important joint initiative together with the RCC. The COVID-19 crisis is a development crisis. It is testing our resilience in all sectors of the economy and all areas of development, from public health, social protection, and governance to employment. The fragile economic and political environment in the Western Balkans renders it one of the most vulnerable regions to the impacts of the pandemic. All current estimates warn of a massive unemployment wave. And much of our current work since the onset of the crisis has focused on enabling governments to make smart policy decisions, choices that are fully adapted to the regional and national context. An area that requires our collective action is women's labor participation, as we could have seen from the film. And women's labor participation is often informal or part-time. Women are, you have seen it just before, 40% of the total employed in the Western Balkans, and more than 23% of them hold insecure jobs. Now, job losses have disproportionately hit women who are concentrated in the sectors most affected by the pandemic, such as hospitality and retail. With less access to assets, property, and financial services, women have also struggled to maintain their enterprises and small businesses. Low-income and migrant worker women have been especially concerned because travel restrictions disrupted their work. Now, the sharp increase in the care and domestic duties as a result of overstretched health systems, caring for family, and extended school closures has meant a loss of income for many women as well. But even more devastating is the rise in physical and psychological violence suffered by women and children, mostly at home and mostly from family members. Prolonged lockdowns have exposed them to greater risks while cutting off sources of support. The violence has reached the levels of a shadow pandemic, as the UN Secretary General has said, one that puts us all on alert to do much more to eliminate this scourge. And we all have a role to play here. It is in this same context that women's economic empowerment and equal participation in the labor market has become more urgent than ever. And jointly with our partners and UN agencies, UNDP is stepping up the efforts to increase investment in social care infrastructure, to introduce and implement policies to redistribute unpaid care and domestic work, to strengthen legal frameworks for equal access to assets and land, and to ensure that social protection programs address the needs of women in precarious and informal employment. A crucial pathway to economic empowerment today and in the future world of work lies in the STEM fields. For too long, discriminatory stereotypes have prevented women and girls from having equal access to education in science, technology, engineering, and math. These stereotypes are flat wrong. They deny women and girls the chance to realize their potential and deprive the world of the talent and innovation of half its population. We have to therefore close the gender tech gap, the gender gap in science and technology, to empower women, but also to ensure that economies and societies can benefit from their entire human capital and not just parts of it. Now, dear colleagues, RCC and UNDP are proposing to you today a comprehensive framework for high impact interventions to improve the status of women and to advance gender equality in the region. This initiative comprises key thematic areas, the so-called drivers of change. It presents a strategic vision and it defines actions to strengthen women's human capital, whose participation and leadership in politics and in the economy are crucial to inclusive socio-economic development. The framework outlines an all-encompassing approach involving a wide array of actors and constituencies, because we remain committed to close collaboration with all our partners, including all our partners in the UN family. With multilateral cooperation and coordination as its key principles to advance gender equality, this UNDP RCC initiative sets forth priority actions to turn the COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity, because together we can build a better future for ourselves. And we aim to set up a regional network that mobilizes policymakers and stakeholders, enhances regional dialogue, and promotes cooperation and good practices for women economic empowerment. Our shared objective is to accelerate gender equality in all aspects, as it is envisaged in the Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a promise to leave no one behind. The agenda is at risk from the multidimensional cascading impacts of COVID-19 today. If we fail to adopt a gender perspective in our responses to the pandemic, we will fail to build a resilient society and achieve a sustainable recovery for the region. And this will reinforce what we have observed before the region, namely growing inequality, before the crisis, which is growing inequalities in the Western Balkans. Now, I want to conclude by emphasizing once more that the world needs women's skills. It needs women's talents, innovation, perspectives, and leadership to solve its biggest challenges, from tackling climate change to rebuilding economies after the pandemic. Women with economic independence can innovate, lead, adapt, and create. They bring the spirit to their families and communities, and they pass it on to their children and grandchildren, which is most important. Gender equality is both an imperative for building forward better and an opportunity to tap our full human potential. We must not return to pre-pandemic gender inequalities, and we have to do more than ensure that women are not left behind. We must let women control assets, and we must ensure that they can lead. Thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Over.
Thank you very much, Ms. Poleric-Eger. And without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Mailinda Bregu, the Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council, to give her introductory remarks. Mailinda, please.
Mute.
Mailinda, could you please unmute yourself?
I'm having serious problems since days with the internet. I don't know. I unmuted and then again. So I will restart. I'm really feeling well to talk today at this event, not only because I do relate quite strongly with the initiative that we are about to launch together with UNDP. And this is an idea that we have been carrying and discussing since a year almost now with Mirjana. Again, not only because the topic has signed somehow my public and political life, but even because I find extremely important that this idea made even the skeptics to change their mind. So there are many sides of the agenda of women empowerment that we can share and talk for a day long, and it will not end. But some sides talk past to each other. We have been used, and then we heard a lot during all this, let's say, our grown-up lifetime as women, about the feminism, about men have more opportunities, or concepts that stable families are those who follow the traditional model, or children raised in broken homes learn less at school. So all these kind of stereotypes, conceptions and misconceptions about gender, women, too much preaching in each society, to tell the women time after time how to breathe, live, function, talk, dress, and so on. So we know, and we have to deal with the incredible pressure and toxic judgment to time after time. But paradoxically, equality between men and women, even in our region, has never been closer. But yet women's rights and women empowerment has never been under such a threat. I would really hope that, especially in times of crisis like the one that we are living in, and from now on, to have the presence of more skillful women and men in the region to provide light and hope. And I believe that our societies get better if men and women cooperate equally for the common good, although we all differ in cooperation. But it's cooperation which is not antagonism, which is not animosity, which is not dissolution, not even, that can really make this process a successful one, because it implies knowing how to balance. We are all aware that Western Balkans is not a rich region. Poverty from one side and unemployment entails fear, stress, humiliations, and hardships. That's why we need the contribution of everybody to uplift our economies. I do share support with Mirjana about what she said on the importance and the right timing of this initiative that outlines targeted actions to improve the status of women and bring about a long needed and desired change. We have been promoting women economic empowerment and remarkable women from the region as from RCC during the whole last year, with, let's say, a solid belief that empowering women economically is not a zero-sum game in which women win and men lose. It empowers societies. By doing so, we are also boosting the growth potential of our economies. So what we are trying and what we will launch today, I hope it will be in the near future, not only a platform, but it will be a nice and wonderful piece of thought and a model for our economies and policymakers as well, to give their opinions, their ideas. The world is full of them, but we need targeted ideas for our region on how to best contribute to unlock the women power and the women potential in the region. You know the figures, all of you. Prior to the pandemic, almost 2/3 of working age women in the Western Balkans were either unemployed or outside the labor market. At around 45%, female labor participation rate is on average around 7 percentage points lower than the EU leverage. And during the pandemic, which definitely makes some things worse, a large majority of working age women are staying inactive, and they might even lose their jobs completely. So the situation is not rosy. The situation is not, I would say, everywhere, and not everything is gray, because the level of the participation of female researchers, for instance, is holding steady in the region. and in some cases even increasing. So in most economies, women not only tend to be, let's say, par with men, but in many of the areas they really overdue, and there are we have good examples of women outshining men in many sectors, even in the health sector, or those who are working in engineering, some of them. So I will not be too long, but I hope that this platform will really bring all of us together to identify joint actions on how to unleash the economic potential of women in the region. I am always a partisan, and I'd always support starting from early education. Education at home, education in the schools, which it might really differ one from another, but both are quite important. At home, we educate our kids, boys and girls, and at school, we need to educate them, and teachers as well will have really an impeccable role in here to try to channel women's and girls' perspectives and their talent in science, as we have been promoting so far. So to see more young women and girls studying in science, technology, engineering, and math. Then to change the attitudes. This is maybe the most difficult part, because attitudes are usually rooted in the culture of one society. Stereotypes as well are rooted in there, but for that to change, we cannot really pretend that only by talking or meeting among each other, women who have something to say can change the situation. We need politicians, we need women politicians to speak rightly on women issues and the whole inclusiveness and women empowerment. We need business and public sector as well to promote and then give good examples of women and success stories of women in our societies. So we need to make employment as well more attractive to women, but also women more attractive in trying to promote their skills rightly. So there are a lot of initiatives. A part of those are part of this platform that we are launching today. So I do hope that not only everybody will have the same understanding that investing in women is proven to boost the societies. It's proven to help to good governance, to economic growth, to community health, to peace and stability, but also it will help us all to consider and focus on the role and the actions that women from the region, in not only women and men from the region, the messages that we need to reinforce, to advocate, but as well to find the common areas of cooperation that will make women economic empowerment not only an agenda because it's part of the SDGs, or it's a trend, let's say discourse worldwide, but to root the understanding that whenever we are empowering women, family, kids, community, societies will be empowered as well. So thank you from my side.
Thank you very much, Maylinda, for very encouraging and very inspiring words. And I would now like to give the word to Mr. Clive Rumbold, senior expert on the Western Balkans at the European External Action Service. And I hope that we will also be able to see Mr. Rumbold at this point. Yes, excellent. Mr. Rumbold, you have the word.
Good. I hope my video working. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting our Managing Director, Angelina Eichhorst, to speak today. She was unable to join us, but considers this an extremely important topic for the EAS to address and asked me to speak on her behalf. I want to start by putting women's economic empowerment into the broader context of the process of EU integration. The Western Balkans is part of Europe, and they will all become part of the European Union. So it's not a question of if, but when? It's a question of our treaties and the mechanisms for accession. They are central, all our tools are engaged, and they're working. But it's also a question of interests. It's increasingly clear that we share vital interests, whether as regards security, climate, or economy, also from a geopolitical point of view. And it's clear that those interests are best served by maintaining the momentum of EU integration, to which the people of the region are clearly committed. That's why all our partners have clear reform agendas in place for moving forward on European integration. They know what they have to do. We keep working with the Western Balkans as the closest of partners, as we've done during COVID, in partnership with the UN, which helped implement EU support on the ground, and preparing for the rebuilding phase with huge support under the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans. I'm sure my Commission colleagues, Marta, will be speaking about that a little bit later. And we keep working on moving ahead on the EU path. Joining the EU is a huge endeavour with huge benefits for countries, people and businesses, and we shouldn't expect it to be easy. The reforms needed are very demanding, but precisely because of that, the process does work and it does deliver transformation, hugely significant positive change. We will get there. And this is useful to keep in mind when considering the issue of women's economic empowerment in the region, because it goes to the core of the requirements for joining the EU. Now, this is true from a number of different but jointly and separately compelling angles. First of all, and fundamentally, it's a human rights issue, a question of equality. Gender equality is a universally recognized human right. It's a core value and political objective of the European Union and a driver of economic growth, prosperity, good governance, as well as peace and security. The EU has adopted a holistic approach, integrating a gender perspective at the design stage of its policy and of its programming. The EU Gender Equality Strategy 2020 to 2025, adopted earlier this year, acknowledges the need to boost the promotion of gender equality. It urges progress on women's leadership and women's economic empowerment. It calls for an equal Europe. With the new Gender Action Plan on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment in External Relations 2021 to 2025, what we call GAP 3, the EU is sending a clear political message throughout the world that we remain fully committed to accelerating progress on gender equality and women's empowerment in all of our EU external action. GAP 3 calls for an equal world, focusing on the key thematic areas of engagement, including fight against gender-based violence and promoting the economic, social, and political empowerment of women and girls. It puts a renewed emphasis on universal access to healthcare, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and gender equality in education, as well as promoting equal participation and leadership. It also fully integrates the EU policy framework on women, peace, and security as a cross-cutting theme. GAP 3 will also address new challenges and opportunities linked to the digital transformation and the changes it brings to the world of work, as well as promoting a fair and inclusive green transition that benefits women and men, and girls and boys alike. Women have a right to full participation in the economic life of the Western Balkan countries and of the region. Women's economic empowerment is a preventive measure to combat the always prominent shadow pandemic that is domestic violence, in particular in these times when our homes are also in our office. And I note that Mirjana rightly raised the same point. But it's also an economic question in itself, a question of economic interest. The Western Balkan countries still have a lot of work ahead to catch up with the economies of the EU and to transition to a modern, green, people-based economy. Part of the process of joining the European Union is becoming economically competitive in the EU context, so that when countries join, they can compete successfully with the rest of the European Union and contribute to our overall economic strength. We don't just want new member states, we want good new EU member states that contribute positively to building our union. But the limited participation of women in the economy of the region is also one of the barriers to economic growth. Women's economic empowerment is a game changer for the long term and also part of the COVID-19 recovery plan. That's why initiatives such as the Common Regional Market are so important, in that they aim to maximize the competitiveness by breaking down barriers to trade and economic growth. Congratulations to Mylinda and to the RCC for the adoption of the action plan at the 10th of November Budapest Process Sofia Summit. The provisions of the Common Regional Market Action Plan on promoting women's entrepreneurship and on improving education and training for women are central to the region's work on joined-up economic development. It's just common sense that countries need to make sure that the female half of their populations is contributing to their economic strength. Countries anywhere in the world that aren't doing that are not just reactionary, but short-sighted and not acting in their own self-interest. When it comes to stimulating women's involvement in the economy, studies have shown that loans to small businesses led by women are more successful. EU research shows that women tend to be associated with long-term patient capital and more social impact investment, and that women's wealth represents a huge economic opportunity to accelerate change towards a more diverse and sustainable financial system. The ILO has found that when it comes to microfinance, women clients register higher repayment rates, contribute more of their income to household consumption than their male counterparts, and that their children have an increased likelihood of full-time school enrollment and lower dropout rates. Again, I want to underline the fundamental values-based importance of ensuring women's full economic engagement through greater empowerment, as well as through their full participation in decision-making. Fundamental human rights principles make it an obligation. But there is also a common sense economic development argument which is undeniable. For both these reasons, economic empowerment of women is key on the EU integration path. So with this in mind, I warmly welcome the presentation today of the Western Balkan Roadmap for Women's Economic Empowerment, and I look forward very much to our discussion on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rumbold. And indeed, it was a pleasure to have a man as a speaker after two women speakers. Now, again, for another woman introduction, advisor to the Deputy Director General at DG NEAR in the European Commission. Ms. Garcia Fidalgo, you have the word.
Thank you very much. And I, after listening to Clive, I realized how arduous is to be the last speaker in an opening. But on the other side, I'm very happy to see how close External Action Service and the European Commission are sharing the vision on the gender equality. I would like first to start by congratulating UNDP and the RCC for this joint initiative. I think for me, it's very important the message you give that only working together in a coordinated way, we are going to be able to get real progress on the ground. And I also like a lot your approach. You are not only presenting to us your strategic view, but also identifying concrete actions that need to be taken. I think also, again, that is an important message for all of us. It's not only important, the work do not finish when we have the strategic view. It only starts, and it's the concrete actions that will make possible to change the reality on the ground. And I do think that this approach is the winning approach. Now on the EU agenda, and I think Clive has already said the most important. The year 2020 has been a year when the gender equality has been very high on the EU agenda. We have had, as Klaus said, in March, the adoption of the Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025, and now recently in November, the launch of the Action Plan on Gender Equality and empowerment in external relations, what we call GAP3. And I would like to underline one point. Both documents are equally relevant for the Western Balkans. It's not only about the external relation. Why? The GAP3 is evident. Our enlargement policy belongs to the external policy. But what I will say it is even more important. The EU gender equality, the 2025 equality, and all the new, more enhanced and demanding approach will need to be factored in progressively in the enlargement process. And yes, because as Klaus has said, what we want is that when the enlargement region, each of the countries will become a member state, this will be a success for the EU, but also for the countries. And this progressive factoring will have an important role because we know that all the changes required, and I will put some examples of the policy system for member states, for example, the Equality Pay Directive, or the possibility to have high quality and affordable children's and family support is not something that can be arranged on the 11th hour. It's not because they are not member state that they can say, okay, on the 11th hour, we will wake up on the member state requirement. No, this will require to be ready for the accession days, a short, a medium, and a long-term activity. Today's conference theme, Empowering of Women, is really touching of one of the 5 pillars of the EU policy. The 5 pillars are ending gender-based violence, ensuring that the women have access to sexual and reproductive health rights. It's also about what is important, and Mrs. Bregu has mentioned, equal participation is also very relevant on the role of the women in peace and security. And I think it's also a reality that still exists in the region and require, even if we are talking about a long way past time, still some progress. And I'm sure the women's role is essential. And lastly, is about economic and social rights and women empowerment. As already said by Clive, we are not talking only about a human right issue, a very important human right issue. And we have to understand that the core of the Commission life, the core of the EU life, the EU system is the respect of human rights. Sometimes we even ourselves forget about it, but this women empowerment is also a smart economic investment. The Western Balkans cannot afford excluding the contribution for the economic development of half of its population. And the figures that were presented in the opening video show us that there is a lot of work to do. And this has been relevant now for years, but I think now on the actual Western Balkan context and EU context of recovery of the COVID crisis, and what is very specific for the Western Balkans, the brain drain we cannot afford. And we have also from each of us, from our responsibility to be sure that all these enormous women potential are liberated and are given to be part of the country and the economic growth in each of them. I have to admit that my work in the region, and I think I'm working now for more than 10 years in the Western Balkan region, has shown to me that, as it happened also in some member states, in a lot of families still in the Western Balkans, there is a traditional vision of the role of the women. there are these gender stereotypes that consider that the women's role needs to be concentrated in unpaid work, staying at home, caring for the children and for the family. I know also, as mentioned by Mr. Bregu, that are very important and bright exceptions, but we will need to work on what is really difficult, what is the people minds, showing that this win-win is also benefiting them without putting at risk their own traditional values. I'm definitely looking forward to this presentation and discussion. I would like to underline that DG NEAR is strongly committed to move ahead on gender equality and women's and girls' rights and empowerment, and is prepared and willing to further develop the use of all our tools for this objective. When I say all our tools, we are willing to involve this area in our political discussion, political dialogues. We are ready and willing to increase our support using our financial assistance. And we are also willing to keep closely monitoring the situation on the ground and alerting based on solid data what is progressing and what is not progressing. And allow me to conclude my intervention using the words of our President, Ursula von der Leyen. Gender equality is a core principle of the European Union, but is not yet a reality. In business, politics, and society as a whole, we can only reach our full potential if we use all our talents and diversity. Using only half of the population, half of the ideas, half of the energy is not good, and we cannot afford. We have to progress. The reality now is not enough. We need to go forward and put more energy on achieving that objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garcia Fidalgo. And I think that our introductory speakers have given us a very thorough and comprehensive overview of both the general and more principle-based, but also very practical reasons for economic empowerment of women. I would therefore now like to invite Ms. Daniela Gasparikova from UNDP to take the floor for the presentation of our initiative, which we are launching today. Ms. Gasparikova, please go ahead, and you have around 10 minutes for the presentation. I hope you can fit in so that we can continue successfully with our panel discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I will do my best to honor the time limit that I have been given. So without further ado, let me introduce in more detail this UNDP RCC joint framework for joint action, which outlines high impact interventions to improve the status of women and advance gender equality in the Western Balkans region. The framework presents a strategic vision for a long-term change, which we have already heard a little bit earlier, the call for, and it delineates the actions to strengthen human capital of women and whose participation and leaderships in politics and the economy are crucial for inclusive social and economic development. The framework presented today is grounded in the recognition that the economic development and investment so far have not really delivered for women. On the contrary, already before the crisis, we have seen the slowdown and in some cases, unfortunately, also reversal in the progress and the gains on the women's economic empowerment of the last decade. It is also grounded in the lessons learned in progress of the last decade, which I would be very happy to hear from you whether you concur with those. And those lessons learned are threefold. The first one is, if we confine addressing women's economic empowerment into activities implemented only in the project frameworks and the long frames, without generating political leadership and championships, we are not going to see the acceleration. The second lessons learned, that is that only with adopting the long-term systemic change and outlook that aims to address power imbalance, ownership of economic assets, and cultural barriers and norms will we be able to move the needle. And indeed, as it was already said earlier, if we do not pursue the in a coordinated manner, strong partnerships at the national level, at the regional level, at the international global level, across all the players and actors, we will see most likely either the deceleration or the stagnation of the process in going forward. So in this regard, the framework puts forward a proposition to the partners and the willings of 5 interrelated and complementary drivers of change with corresponding areas of actions. We believe that if pursued in a concerted manner, these will move the progress on the women's economic empowerment, taking the advantage of the opportunities that the economic recovery allows and related investments in the region. This way, we trust that the Western Balkans economies could pursue achievement of double objectives of meeting indeed the EU political accession benchmarks related to the gender equality and equality more broadly, but also at the same time also accelerate the progress on achieving sustainable development goals, and in particular the goal 5 on the gender equality. Now, let me move then to the specific drivers as outlined in the framework that we have shared with you. It is recognized and put forward also in this framework that without women's leadership and access to work, we will probably continue to see only very slow progress in increasing what is currently 40% of the employment in the Western Balkan region by women, and only what is currently only 23% of the female population holding secure jobs. With the exception of North Macedonia and Serbia, also we are witnessing that women are underrepresented in decision and political level and political decision making. And in majority of the regions, they hold less than a third of ministerial positions and parliamentary seats. So while the political representation and the role of women in decision making is a first step, it is not enough. We believe that by gaining the political representation and increased participation of women in decision making, and strengthening the leadership academy and the leadership power in the region, we will be able to inform the next generation of the policies to ensure that they work for the gender equality in economy, that they work for gender equality in digital transformation, and that with women around the table, the investments that are made into bringing, for example, fourth industrial revolution into this region will work equally both for men and women. We have seen, and I saw also in the comment, that in the chat box, that it is very important with having women around the table to break the discrimination and segregation that we see in the economic sectors, both horizontal and vertical. And this driver of the change and related actions may put forward the proposition that with the women around the table, we will be able to break the barriers that confine women into certain economic sectors at the moment and into the certain payment and salary brackets, if you want. Now, the second driver of the change that we see in the Western Balkans region that present an untapped potential is related to accelerating the women's entrepreneurship. And I have heard over the last few months a number of excellent stories of female entrepreneurs from the Western Balkans region. Nevertheless, still in majority of the region, we have less than 1/3 of the female business owners. And they do tend to operate in smaller, non-capital intensive and low income sectors, often lacking access to credit, networking opportunities, and access to collateral. So this driver puts forward the call for the increased women access to finance and assets as well, which are combined with a more systematic at different stages of women's lives, enhancement and access to the improvement of their financial literacy. This goes hand in hand with more traditional approaches, which range around building the gender-sensitive business trainings and entrepreneurship upskilling programs to promote women-held businesses in the region, as well as support women's businesses to be developed, founded, and grown into the sectors and in those supply chains of the diverse industry that add higher value and that break the occupational segregation and sectoral segregation that I have spoken about earlier. The third driver of the change that we are putting forward and that we are seeing as critical to move along to bring about the progress in the region is related to transforming the public and private sectors alike when it comes to the gender equality. We have seen that in the both public and private sector and in the public administrations in particular, we see the high numbers of the females representations, but they usually are in certain categories. And again, they are often limited, confined to the lower payment brackets, and they upward mobility is often limited. By the same token, in the private sector, women are currently in this region accounting only for around 40% of top managers in the companies. So this driver of change calls for the creating and development of the accountability framework for gender equality in public institutions and private sector alike, introducing gender standards across all levels, including the mandatory and gender responsive budgeting. When we talk about the companies and private sectors, this region has quite, while in the private sector and the companies, introduction of any quotas is most likely to be voluntary. We also see that in the economies of this region, there is still quite a high proportion, for example, of state-owned enterprises over which the public administrations have a regulatory authority to demand or to ask to introduce more quotas or more women in their governing structures, such as boards or the advisory boards of those companies. So we see that this is potentially, an untapped opportunity that this framework could open the space for the collaboration and discussions as to how this entry point could be capitalized on. And last but not least, I think that both Clive and Marta has already alluded to that responding to the greater diversity and creating the greater diversity of the talent and to promote the gender parity at all levels will be critical in this regard. I'm moving to the fourth driver of the change that we see and hear more and more is seen as a critical barrier that needs to be overcome in the Western Balkan region to unlock the women's potential, and that is the recognition and more fair redistribution of the unpaid and care work, which is underpinned by the investments into the care economy. Gender stereotypes prevent women oftentimes in an invisible way to participate in the labor market and in the economic activities. And we see that in the Balkan region, women perform on average 3 times more unpaid work than men and spend about half as much time in the paid work. They also account for more than 80% of workers in low-paid care sectors, such as in education, health, and social care. So this driver of the change is firstly calling for more recognition and understanding of how at the different points of the women's lives they make the contribution both to childcare, family care, but also in later lives to the elderly family care, and how if these are not recognized and invested in through the institutional mechanisms, how these again pose the barriers for women to make the choices where they are able to reconcile the responsibility that they have towards their families, but also with the ambitions that they have in participating in the economic or the employment activities. Second, we will be able to move the needle, and that's the action that is also proposed under this driver of the change, only if we have investments made into the social protection for paid care workers, but also the recognition and the investments in the childcare facilities that would then, and better policies and the incentives that would encourage the fair distributions of the work among the spouses, and that would then lead also to employers seeing the benefit in adopting the more flexible work arrangements, and in the businesses also in investing in the child plans with the subsidies and the grants. And the last but not least, the driver of the change that we are putting forward for the discussion, and it was also partly already mentioned before, is closing the gender gaps in the digitalizations and the science, technology, engineering, and the maths. We have seen that also in this area, the gender stereotypes prevents many girls and women, choosing the pursuing of the careers and the education in these fields. The share of women in STEM occupations is only around 14%, and gender pay gaps and gender bias in technology that we are witnessing is oftentimes exacerbating the inequalities that we already see outside in other sectors. With the digitalization putting strongly on the investment and development agenda of the Western Balkans region, if we do not address the current gaps, we risk that the progress that the digitalization brings to the region will further exacerbate these gaps and the segregation that we have seen in the economic areas. So, with this driver of the change, definitely we would like to see more women and girls and have the conversation about how we can see more women and girls pursuing the careers and the opportunities in the STEM sector, not only as an area of education, but that also they indeed, once they finish the STEM master's degree or the tertiary or vocational education, they do successfully transition either to the labor market, or they are successful in setting up the companies and the entrepreneurial businesses. And also we put forward the discussion, and that is again related to the larger investments and the plans that the Western Balkans region has in bringing the internet access and the coverage of the internet, for example, and the discussion about how it should be rolled out in such a way that the women are progressing along the digital inclusion continuum and are able to shape some of these discussions and the investments that will be put forward in the region. Let me conclude by saying that from this framework of action and the suggested way forward from UNDP and RCC that we are committed to is indeed taking the advantages of multiple links between the Western Balkans and already existing EU member states under the Berlin process. It is recognizing and fully aligned with the achievement of some of the goals and the priorities of the gender equality strategy for 2020-2025. And it puts forward and builds on the opportunities that we see in the region to further strengthen the regional cooperation and thus accelerate also the achievement of the SDGs. We see it as a framework that goes also beyond the Western Balkans region and actually promotes a two-way approach and peer learning between the Western Balkan countries and constituencies and the EU member states, partners, constituencies, institutions, and organizations. So that is, in our view, very important element of jointly moving forward. And I believe that also based on what I've heard earlier, that indeed that's the spirit also of the EU gender equality strategy. It is also underpinned by the co-designing of the systematic approach targeting social and institutional change, and that will jointly galvanize already very strong Western Balkan leadership for women's economic empowerment and investments in closing the gender gap in the Western Balkan region. So the last sentence, to adopt a gender perspective in the COVID-19 response, and our failure or success in doing so will affect the resilience of the societies and sustainable and just recovery of the economies in the Western Balkan region. So thank you very much once again for having the opportunity to present in more detail, and I very much look forward to our conversation, not only today, but also in weeks and months forward. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Gasparikova, for sharing with us the details of the 5 priority areas of this initiative. Before we move on to the next part of the event, which is a panel discussion joining representatives of the policymaking world, of the private sector, development partners, women's organizations, academia, to reflect on the key priorities and propose some practical solutions from their particular professional experience, I would just like we would just like to show you a very short video animation that was prepared for this, please. Okay, I think that was a nice transition that we have had, and let us dig right away into our panel discussion with the 6 amazing panelists, experts from across our region. I would like first to discuss for 5 minutes very shortly, and in this part I will have to be a little bit more strict with the time, because otherwise we will not be able to bring in our audience at all, which would be a pity, as I'm sure you will agree. So I would like to first ask Ms. Mirela Arcimandriti, who is the Executive Director of the Gender Alliance for Development Center, about a particular issue related to how increased financial commitment can help create jobs and perspectives for women in the regional labor market. We know that some of the industries that you are dealing with, that you are closely looking at, such as garment and textile industry, are overwhelmingly feminized. So what has been done so far from a gender lens to address this particular issue and to narrow the gap between the female and the male ratio? So please, Ms. Arcimandriti, in 4 to 5 minutes. And if you can, in your response, also reflect on what are the possible, let's say, roles for the international partners and international organizations, but also for the national governments.
Thank you. Dear Secretary General Madame Bregu, dear Madame Miguel and Fidalgo, Mr. Rumboldt, dear moderator, participants, colleagues and friends, it is an honor for me to participate to this event that will pave the way for areas of joint actions in the Western Balkans for women economic empowerment. This is a very important event that should serve as the milestone for starting of a regional strategy for the economic empowerment of women and girls in the Western Balkans countries, whose impact should be strengthened year after year and action by action in collaboration with all stakeholders. I trust that the work of UNDP and Regional Cooperation Council will bring forward concrete economic empowerment approaches and actions for women in Western Balkans. I came from a long activism for the rights of women and girls and from several years of work as a leader of a project supported by Olof Palme Center and SIDA, dedicated to women and girls working in textile and garment sector. These women are facing multiple challenges in their life and at the workplace, such as lack of labor contract with rights and obligations, lack of decent working conditions, extremely low salaries, extremely large production rate, occupational health and safety emerging issues, multiple discrimination, violence and harassment at the workplace, even sexual violence, which is completely unreported. These workers are producing well-known brands in demand in the market with very high prices. However, thousands of workers for these brands, mostly women in Albania, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, encounter economic violence in their daily work. The low wages of female workers in turn means that women struggle with poverty-related gender-specific consequences. In many households, the woman is the sole earner, and yet because she is a woman, she is also expected to do household and care work in addition to paid work, bringing about a double burden. From the other side, the textile and garment industry has suffered tremendous losses as a result of coronavirus pandemic. As Sanja Popovic, the head of the Association of Women in Business in Serbia, mentioned in chat, the pressure and financial burden are in turn being passed on directly to the workers. Wages are not paid and many workers are dismissed. So you asked me a question, why the garment industry is overwhelmingly feminized and how to reduce the gap.
Yes, and you have two more minutes to respond to that question.
Enforce the law that the job places are decent according to ILO standards. The salary should be in the level of living wage and not equal to minimum salary, as it is in my country. The minimum wages in our country should be fixed in accordance with reliable international living wage standards. The living wage should be properly calculated. Our countries should ratify the ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment at the workplace and implement the Recommendation 206. Provide free legal aid and health care for the victims at the workplace, enable relevant inspection authorities and monitoring bodies to better monitor the gender-based violence issues at the workplace. So these can also serve as recommendations for economic empowerment of women. Saying all this above, my answer to your question is that men will join forces when the job at the garment industry is organized in decent working conditions and a decent salary will be paid. Having this opportunity, I want also to mention that Gender Alliance, the organization I represent, is part of 3 joint regional initiatives. And one is empowering CSOs in combating discrimination and furthering women's labor rights in collaboration with 5 CSOs from 5 Western Balkan countries, Gender Budget Watchdog Network in collaboration with 6 CSOs from Western Balkan and Moldova, and enhancing women access to employment. These initiatives have been supported by different donors, such as EU, Austrian Development Agency, SIDA, Norwegian Embassy in Pristina. Through this project, we work for anti-discrimination, decent job places, living wage, fiscal budgeting, gender-based policy analysis, economic empowerment of women, employment. So we have produced many reports with data, researches, and important documents, as well as organized important activities in different levels and with different stakeholders. We have methodologies that can be shared as a good start for a strong collaboration under your initiative. Therefore, we will be very interested to collaborate and share approaches together in the way to make a reality the economic empowerment of women in the Western Balkans countries.
Thank you very much, Ms. Archimandriti. Thank you very much for indeed pointing out what the governments can do, but also what the international partners can and are doing in this regard. I would just like to invite our participants, the audience, to pose questions through the Q&A function. You can, of course, also through this Q&A function pose questions in relation to the presentation of the initiative by Ms. Gasparikova, who is still here with us. I would now like to move to Ms. Ismeta Dervoz, who is former member of parliament and renowned women rights activist. And Ms. Dervoz, I would like to ask you, given your very rich background in the civil society, I would like to know your perspective on the civil society organizations that are dealing with human rights and especially women's rights. So through the close cooperation between the CSOs and the authorities, what has been your experience? Could you unmute yourself, Ms. Dervoz, please?
Yes, I forgot.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, do you hear me now? You hear me now, I hope.
We do. Sorry, I was also on mute. No, now, okay, now it's good.
Good. Good afternoon from Sarajevo. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join distinguished colleagues today and all panelists. As a parliamentarian, I advocate the empowerment of women and strengthening their position in the society. I used every opportunity to stress the importance of goals that can be achieved through promoting, protecting, and strengthening their rights, improving social and economic situation, increasing women presence on the labor market, securing fair representation in political and economic decision-making processes, and encouraging their entrepreneurship. For me, it's a key to strengthening and consolidating democracy. As an economist by education and with almost 3 decades of experience work in media, I have always been focused on the economic empowerment of women and empowerment in public space, in public life. Political and parliamentary work has enabled me to channel and turn it into concrete projects and initiatives. As we all know, collaboration, cooperation, and network, teamwork are needed for realization. That is why I'm glad that you asked me a question related to my cooperation with a non-governmental organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina. After the 90s, the first to connect the entities in BiH and the entire war-torn region were members of the NGOs. I would want to remember here the brave and dedicated women from Banja Luka, Zenica, Sarajevo, Tuzla, raised borders and obstacles and provided help to those in need. Knowing this before I became a parliamentarian, I respectfully accepted the invitation of NGO activists, and as a politician, a parliamentarian spoke on their behalf where they could not. Politicians have more opportunities to get space in media, to make some problems more visible faster. That is one of the reasons why this cooperation is important and necessary. NGOs are very involved in activities at the local level. In a complex system in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you know, we have state level, 2 entities, district, 10 cantons. They are the one who first identify problems, raise awareness of the needs of possibilities for solving them, and animate those responsible. Numerous educations and informations of the population in various fields, seminars and humanitarian activities are conducted and coordinated by NGOs. For example, the problems of vulnerable groups, Roma women, women from rural areas, abused women, women victims of war, unemployed, single mothers are all topics addressed by civil society organizations. Over the years in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it has become a network of organizations that have regionally connected and strengthened contacts with the institution and those politicians, parliamentarians who had enough understanding for their work. In the wide range of activities, the topics closest to me were gender equality and non-discrimination, empowerment, the fight against violence against women and youth. We together launched many initiatives and together participate in activities advocating for legal changes, or adoption of international documents. For example, I work with the NGOs that care for women's rights to promote the Istanbul Convention, not just in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the whole region, proposals for new and amendments to existing laws. Together, we initiate changes to election law, and now we have a quota of 40%. We advocate equalization of a woman's maternity rights in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, founding safe houses, advocate constitutional changes. We do not miss, of course, any activity during the 16 days of activism. Numerous organizations and activists now face funding problems, and this diminished their results. But the best and the most resilient are the better opposition than the political one, and are an excellent partner to institutions that recognize and want them. I should certainly be pointed out that there are also those who consider them a problem, especially when they talk about corruption, even label them as collaborators of foreign services and similar nonsense. In the area in which I am engaged, there is very good cooperation between institutions and non-governmental organizations. For example, BBIH Agency for Gender Equality at the Ministry of Human Rights and Refugees regularly provides grants for NGO projects with the help of international organizations and donors. The Council of Ministers of Bosnia and Herzegovina has an agreement of cooperation with the NGOs. Just yesterday, I saw that research is conducted by the Ministry of Justice of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and one non-governmental organization aims to determine the certain parameters of the state of non-governmental organizations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, about their activities, the problems they have in work. I believe in a desire to improve their status and cooperation with institutions.
Ms. Dervas, my apologies for interrupting you, but since it has already been 6 minutes, I do have to be, as a moderator, I know that this is a very difficult role, but we do have 4 more panelists to go. So one more sentence, please.
Thank you very much. I will conclude with this. I always place my hopes in a strong, dedicated individuals who will know and want to use all the instruments already available to us, those that will provide new ones, that will create a promising socio-economic environment for all, including women, those who will put education, information, productivity and results, care for the interest of all citizens before the lack of political will and daily political interest of the ruling elites. An active, well-informed and educated civil society can be catalyst for problems, can be a corrective government, a basis that contributes to democratization of society as a whole. I think it is only necessary to maintain the conditions for activities to be more proactive.
Thank you, Ms. Dervas. Next, I would like to ask you, Ms. Mimosa Kusari Lila, as a politician, as a member of parliament, could you give us a review of the new generation policies on gender equality? Which are the trending topics concerning women's economic empowerment from the perspective of you as a policymaker? Please, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with all of you ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to the discussion. Certainly would appreciate more if we had been live in Bečice or elsewhere, but this is the new circumstances that we are all conducting activities. From my point as a politician, being in 3 levels of decision making, initially as executive level in government, then as on a mayor position, and now as for 2 consecutive terms as parliamentarian, I've seen that it's so much great importance to have not only as a woman decision maker to lead by example, but also important to encourage, empower, and include women and men in this process. What I've seen recently with the new circumstances imposed by COVID pandemic is the fact that the women had definitely being in marginalized position in decision making and in a economic sector have been affected the most. What had worked, or what actually it was needed, it is the direct intervention, as states and countries were preparing different assistance for the economy. I saw lack of gender perspective in recovery laws and also in the budget that was prepared for intervention in the economy and health sector. I can share with you the experience that we just recently had in Kosovo, as statistically we stand behind some of the average of Western Balkan countries, with women being less than 13% business owners, or participating in labor market less than in other countries. As I've seen the statistics, only less than 20% employability of women. Also, the important element there is to mention is the fact that access to finance is definitely one of the problematic issues. So while we were working on the budget revision for 2020, on the budget code for the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the grants and subsidies for business, I proposed to have half of the budget that is actually designed to assist businesses in Kosovo be designed only for women in business. As initially had gotten different reactions, I've seen that slowly in the Parliament of Kosovo it got the support, and the amendment passed. So we had, for the first time, a separate budget code to assist women in business. Do I see that as enough from the one side or one of the ministries? Definitely not. I think the future, or the next step, would be to establish an agency to assist women in business, as it is the model in often cases in United States, from the university level all the way to state or federal level. But I believe that this could be a great initiative also for countries of Western Balkans. Have an institution that would be dealing only with women, agency for support of girls and women in business or in economy, that would have three components: the technical components, the policy components, and the budget component. So assisting young girls to focus their career on entrepreneurship, as we all know, countries that used to have another system, so entrepreneurship still needs to be incentivized. And also work with governments at the local and central level on the policy changes, including promoting quota on decision-making, in particular in corporate boards, and also in budget or finance assistance direct. When we talk about quota, the past legislation, I also proposed an amendment to the Law on Business Organization, the one that foresees that all shareholding companies in Kosovo needs to have, for the first 2 years of the passing of the law, 40% women on boards, and after 2 years, 50-50. Initially, it got, again, a negative reaction on the major excuse and saying that where do we find competent women? And when the issue of men is never an issue of discussion or competency of men, it came up above do we have enough professional women? In this legislation, I'm making sure that the law is implemented, and in all bodies that report to the parliament, and when the voting comes in to elect boards, we make sure that it's 50-50 or at least 40-60%. And then budget, I believe that it's a great instrument to incentivize women in business or businesses owned by women, including fiscal incentives for also men owners who work toward narrowing the gender gap. So mechanisms are there. I believe it takes the will and the strong political advocacy, and also more women in decision making, that they actually open the path or trailblazer for other women who will follow them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kusari Lila, and thank you very much for staying within time. I think this was an excellent overview of of a practical experience of a policymaker. I would now like to move on to Mr. Miloš Vuković, who is Executive Director of a consultancy company, Fidelity Consulting. So, Mr. Vukovic, I would like to ask you, from your experience, so what is the contribution, how would you describe the contribution to the economic growth of care economy that promotes gender equality and better inclusion of women in the labor market? What is your perspective on the current state of affairs when it comes to recognizing and investing in care economy? 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, first of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to be a panelist on today's conference, and I'm really glad that the economic issues are on the table, and especially in our region, which is an integrative part of European Union. I would just like to start by beginning to quote John F. Kennedy on one economic indicator that everybody understands and notes. It's the gross domestic product, or GDP. Start quote. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. So I think that everybody knows that, and everybody loves GDP because it provides a simple, and I must say superficial number that only shows us one part of the life coin, as I would like to say it. It shows us only the things that we can measure, while it does not understand the true meaning of life. And I would like to speak now about the other part of coin of life, which is care economy, and especially unpaid care economy and domestic work, which is critical for the well-being of individual and the society as a whole. Since it contributes to better functioning of the entire society. Despite such importance for the common good, all countries in the world, except I think one, leave unpaid care and domestic work out of their economic policies due to the assumptions that, unlike the standard models, it's very hard to measure. It cannot be measured. And therefore, it's ignoring this type of unpaid work leads to completely inaccurate conclusions on the socioeconomic position of individuals, in particularly women, since they usually spend disproportionately more time engaged in unpaid type of work. According to the ILO, which I like to quote, unpaid care and gender inequalities at work, according to their data, women perform 76.2% of the total amount of unpaid care work, 3.2 times more than men. Still, this unpaid care work does not go in any economic calculator on a national level. According to one survey that was taken in 64 countries, the biggest countries in the world, it shows that 16.4 billion hours are spent in unpaid care work every day. This equals to 2 billion people working 8 hours per day. If these services are to be valued on the basis of minimum wage, this would amount to 9% of global GDP. So 9% of global GDP is not captured at all at this point of time. Two things that I would like to raise: that unpaid work and quality of the employment, that countries having a high share of unpaid care have performed by women when compared to men, have a higher share of women in part-time and vulnerable jobs, which we see now as COVID crisis hit us so strongly. In addition, part-time employment and the informal sector are another alternative for women, although this has a very, very negative long-term effects when it comes to their long-term benefits and rights, such as pensions. The second thing that I would like to raise is that unpaid care work and gender wage gaps, which are very obvious in all of the world, especially in this region. And according to OECD report, in their cross-country analysis, it shows that where women spend a large time of unpaid care, there is also a large gap in differences in payment. So this means that women are doing the work that is less paid, and it gives them very, very poor prognosis for their enjoyment in beneficiaries and social statuses such as pension. As far as I would like to speak about some policy recommendations that can be made from my side.
In 1 minute, please.
Yes.
One minute remaining.
So the care policies, macroeconomic policies, migrant policies, labor policies, and social protection policies to allocate resources of money, services, and time to measure all forms of care work and take unpaid care work into account when you do decision making. Invest in quality care services, care policies, and infrastructure. Promote active labor market policies. Enact and implement family-friendly working arrangement for all workers, not only limited workers. Promote information and education for more gender equal households, workplaces, and societies. Guarantee the right to universal access to quality care services. Ensure care-friendly and gender-responsive social protection system. Implement gender-responsive and publicly funded leave policies for all women and men. Regulate and implement decent terms and conditions of employment for all of working people with emphasis on women. Promote freedom of association for care workers and employees. Promote the building of alliances between trained unions representing care workers and civil society organizations. And enact laws and implement measures to protect migrant care workers with special focus on women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vukovic, and especially for these very practical and very concrete recommendations. I would now move on to Ms. Nina Angelovska, who is both a former Minister of Finance of North Macedonia, but also a very experienced entrepreneur. And I would like to ask you, Ms. Angelovska, drawing on your successful public career and also being a successful entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, I would like to hear your views on e-economy and digitalization, especially now with the COVID-19 environment. What are the opportunities, but on the other hand, also the obstacles for women, especially during this period? Your 5 minutes begin now.
Thank you very much, Milena. First of all, congrats on UNDP and RCC for this initiative. I think it's very much welcomed in the Western Balkans to put women in the spotlight as a key factor for economic growth and prosperity and progress of our region. You mentioned my former role. I have put digitalization very much into focus, and I've been at the forefront, I would say, in tackling the negative consequences and trying to mitigate and designing the measures during COVID. So I think that there is no doubt that COVID brought unprecedented opportunities for the digital economy and digitalization, but at the same time, it revealed the weaknesses, many underlying weaknesses of our societies. Some of those being the slowness of adapting and applying new digital solutions, not only in the public administration, in the private sector, especially the small companies. And we have heard and seen the statistics today in the presentations, and we have seen data that women have been I would say, very much the vulnerable group that has been hit with the crisis. And of course, today, I think it's more important than ever to exploit these opportunities and speed up the adaptation to make our economies more resilient and smarter in the post-COVID period. So I think for many, many years, maybe not so much, but quite a lot in the last few years, we have been all speaking and hearing, and organizations have been putting it high on the agenda, what it means for our GDP growth to not unlock the potential of women, what they hold for the economies, but somehow we've been moving very, very slow. And if we are striving towards a better and smarter societies in post-COVID, we definitely need more women. We need more women in STEM, more women entrepreneurs, more women in leadership positions, more women decision makers. And now during COVID, we see that we need them more than ever, actually. So countries who recognize the potential of women for their economies are the ones who will enjoy smarter and better society post-COVID. We cannot speak about a more competitive economy, more innovative, more inclusive society if we don't create an enabling environment for women to show what they really can do. So we have seen the opportunities, we have seen that it brought many obstacles and challenges at the same time, but I want to tackle something that maybe hasn't been tackled as a challenge, because we've heard a lot about the numbers and what have been the obstacles and the challenges, and we've seen the opportunities We are seeing them all over around, especially in digital economy, in technology, in digitalization, and in e-commerce. There is great opportunity for women now. But one of the challenges is the digital skills of the region. We have seen in the program and these drivers for change that upskilling and digitalization have been put as part of the program, and we need to put this in action now. Another obstacle that hasn't been brought, but it's more of the point that the previous speaker was speaking about, the more intangible or not quantifiable things, is the confidence that I think women lack, and that's why we need to empower them today more than ever. So I would say the leadership ambitious gap between women and men, especially studies show that when positions are bring more power and are more responsible and require more responsibility, they are more appealing to men rather than women. And this confidence comes from knowledge, of course, which we have seen in the video that you shared. And so that women are more confident and aspire for higher positions, for decision-making positions, we need to enable this environment and tackle all the aspects. But however, when I was writing for Forbes, I actually wrote one article that was titled "Be Competent Like a Woman and Be competent like a woman and be confident and ambitious like a man." Because when we see the competencies, women outperform men, as Ms. Mylinda shared. Women outshine men in many aspects and areas. There is a study that shows that women are better leaders. This is a Harvard study that measured 16 competencies that shows that women have outscored men across many of the competencies which are crucial for leadership. And as we are talking today about a better and smarter post-COVID society, we need urgent action. So this is a very good starting point. We see the obstacles and the challenges, we are aware, and we now need to take action to empower women and to give them the wings for them to show what they can really do.
Thank you, Ms. Angelovska. It was wonderful that you brought up the issue of confidence, and I really believe that these ephemeral issues need to be more in the spotlight, as you have indicated yourself. At this point, I would like to bring in Ms. Marija Babovic, who is both a professor at the university, but also a very empirical and practical feminist researcher. So I would like to ask you, Ms. Babovic, and also with your experience as a think tanker with the Seconds Development Initiative, what are the overall economic trends when it comes to women's economic empowerment? And could you make a parallel with some important caveats issues such as entrepreneurship, access to labor market, access to land, informal economy, etc.? Your 5 minutes.
Thank you. All of that for 5 minutes. That would be really difficult.
You can make a selection. You can make a selection.
Let me try. Well, we conducted a lot of different surveys, many of them with help of UN Women, UNFPA, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, just to mention some of development partners who actually supported very early exploration of impact of COVID on different aspects of livelihoods, economic position of women and men, and also on specific groups like rural women, women entrepreneurs. So actually what became obvious is that all those trends of economic inequalities that are very long lasting in Western Balkans are so pronounced that they are just, they have their own inertia with very small achievements in pre-COVID period. And also we could compare that through gender equality indexes, for example, in domain of work and money. But also COVID crisis showed how actually those weaknesses, how those gender gaps are so profound that they actually augmented during the COVID crisis, and they now place much more alarming imperatives to react during the recovery period. And you could see systematically across the region much lower activity rates, participation. So the level of participation of women in economic sphere is much lower than men. It's systematic, it's everywhere. But I will not speak about all aspects. I will just point to several that I think are very crucial and we have to take care of them in the next period. First one is segregation. It's mentioned already several times, but at least in some countries, it's not at all targeted by systematic policies. Segregation in education, then in labor market, which makes 80% of that health sector is employed by women. We know who takes major burden during this pandemic. And on the other hand, there are opportunities to have better employment prospects, higher salaries, which are in some other sectors are not available simply because they are not there in larger numbers. So segregation should be addressed very urgently, and this should be part of education and gender equality policies, which is not the case right now. Second thing, we have continuously and systematically and historically very persistent gaps in access to capital, to assets, to land, to business space, to production tools, to financial markets. So this is also something that should be addressed. We see some minor changes, but this is mostly limited. For example, we in Serbia have new law, and now property is automatically registered and joined. But of course, this is just in some kind of property, in some urban areas, among younger generation, and it doesn't have that kind of scale of the change that we would like to have. So access to assets, one of the top priorities. Thirdly, women entrepreneurs. We know already that women entrepreneurship is again marked by that segregation. It is mainly in sectors that are not very profitable. It's usually micro enterprises, which we saw are particularly vulnerable on crisis. Local markets, they don't go often to some broader markets. So, and they started from out of necessity, not so much out of a good business idea. And we saw that mortality rate of women businesses, it's higher than among men's businesses. We also saw that they really need support during that nascent period when enterprises are first 42 months, let's say. And there are no programs that address that in a proper way. So we also saw through our research that women entrepreneurs, they evaluate some measures of government during COVID as positive, but not sufficient to make their businesses sustainable. And finally, my fourth point, rural women. We live in the region where a portion of rural population is still high. We know from different researchers that rural women are particularly vulnerable category and also exploited category. They work as family helping members. They don't have incomes. They don't have contracts. They often don't have pension insurance, disability insurance, even health insurance. So, and what we saw during COVID actually that women engaged in agriculture, which is already very vulnerable employment and very often informal. We saw the lack of adequate agriculture and rural development policies because we faced actually the problem of, I mean, there are, of course, incentives to have those short value chains. So women are connected more without intermediaries to consumption markets. But for that, we saw they lack digital technologies, knowledge how to use digital technologies, much more systematic support actually to be able to participate in the way that they can be directly linked to the customers, you know, which adds the value on, they earn much more than if they have a lot of intermediaries. Also, many of them gave up of some kind of production. They opt for going to give their products for some milk companies, so simply to get less value, but to have more certain safe position. So these are just some highlights, some problems, and that recovery period really requires to have close focus on some of those points.
Thank you very much, Ms. Babovic, for this overview. And at this point, since according to the agenda, we have actually exhausted even the time for the discussion, which I have to say was not because of our panelists who really were whom I'm very grateful for mainly sticking to our time frame. But I have a suggestion. We have a few questions in the Q&A, and I would just like at this point to check whether Mr. Clive Rumbold is still with us. Because there are some questions which are specifically addressing the project, the initiative, and I have agreed with the colleagues from RCC and UNDP that these questions can be answered in a follow-up email. So an answer specifically regarding the initiative will be replied on electronically. But if Mr. Rumbold is here, there is a question which is addressing more the EU institutions and especially the EEAS. So I will just wait for a second. If not, okay, yes, Mr. Rumbold.
Yes.
So
thank you very much. Yes.
So
was there a specific you could?
Excuse me, I had a little bit of trouble hearing you, but there are two questions which are actually addressing you, and I would actually pick up
Sure.
on one of them. So we have the representative of Queen Atilquina Foundation, who discussed the issue of violations of maternity leave rights in the Western Balkans, which, as she says, are quite frequent and widespread. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen that women's labor rights have been in even more precarious position than usual. So her question is, following the pandemic, what strategies are in place for DGNIR and EEAS to put pressure on national Western Balkan governments to ensure that their labor laws are in line and in accordance with the EU Work-Life Balance Directive? Please, a very short answer if possible. So what strategies post-COVID-19 to make sure that the Western Balkan governments are in line with the EU pay gap directive?
I mean, I think I'll just come in very briefly because I think this is a question more for our Commission colleagues in terms of alignment with EU standards. But I think you yourself have pointed to the core of this, in that there are EU standards on this which are codified in law and are therefore an obligation for countries that want to join the European Union. Now, in terms of the specific actions that we're doing, you know, we do a whole range of actions that we support through the instrument for pre-accession assistance in terms of build capacity in governance structures in order to put in place these and then to operate them effectively and indeed consistently, which goes to the core of what you said. But in terms of the specific work that we're doing on the ground, perhaps Marta is able to contribute more precisely.
To her as well. We have two remaining questions which actually just concern the project specifically. So as I said, these questions will be taken up by the team from the initiative, and they will be sent, the replies to these questions will be sent to the participants by email. And now, in order to be able to close on time and make sure that we do not lose too many of our participants before the closing remarks, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Maja Hadžiska-Trindafilova, head of the RCC program department, to give her concluding remarks.
Thanks, Milena.
Can we see you too?
I think that this is from the company. They should enable me.
So somebody needs to enable my.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So we are good. Okay. So thanks, Milena. I think that we really have had a stellar cast, both of keynote speakers as well as panelists today, clearly demonstrating the region's key asset, which is women, as well as voicing this unison call for action. So allow me to thank all the panelists for their insightful contributions and the real life experiences that they shared on this increasingly important topic. And I personally believe that we really had extremely rich and substantive discussions, and we are really encouraged by both the contributions as well as the commitments that we heard to the prioritized areas of joint action. So it is not an easy task to summarize the main takeaways from today's discussions, but I will nonetheless try, hoping I will do justice to the various valuable interventions that we heard. I will also provide some forward-looking observations on the next steps as to what lies ahead in terms of lifting off the joint initiatives that we launched today. So to start off with the overall context that we find ourselves in this very challenging year, as the pandemic environment really only intensified the existing gender inequalities. So the economic security of women has been really hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in lost jobs, in reduction of paid working hours, increase in time spent in terms of household and care activities, and also difficulty to access health facilities. So while, of course, everyone is facing the extraordinary challenges, women are bearing the burden of the economic and social fallout of the pandemic. And in particular, today we discussed that women are disproportionately more in the informal economy, that women have less access to social protections, tend to earn less, but also have scarcer savings, which are really important, and that women are more likely to be loaded with this sort of unpaid care work and therefore face more the risk of becoming outcasts in the labor market. So indeed, COVID-19 is swiftly rolling back on the women economic gains, and we need to team up and act now. So it is to this end that both UNDP and we in RCC have joined forces in a strategic partnership to reduce gender gaps and support women economic empowerment and the overall development of our economies and societies in the COVID aftermath, all with the goals to increase women's labor force participation, entrepreneurship, to enable women leadership in economy, to boost innovation and growth, and even contribute to higher quality of governance. So it is a timely initiative that we have joined and rallied today around, that merges the comparative advantages of UNDP and of the RCC and creates this open platform for further development of partnerships, synergies, mobilization, all rallied around the goal and the visual that we discussed today. So it really welcomes for us this all-inclusive approach whereby all the key actors, be it civil society, academia, policymakers, donors, international and regional organizations, have a particular role to play. However, as we all stress today, it is the beginning of our journey. And for a big part, this agenda is already embedded in the common regional market agenda and the action plan that has been politically endorsed and welcomed by the Western Balkans leaders at the Sofia summit in November. So as part actually of this regional actions, the Common Regional Market Action Plan encapsulates a number of activities that are dedicated to encourage women to pursue entrepreneurship careers, to increase their participation in education and STEM fields, to also take part in the regional digital upskilling initiatives, but to also establish entrepreneurship networks as well as women-led innovation networks. So both the SDGs, the EU's general gender equality framework, but also very importantly, the region's EU accession framework, they're all very important guiding forces for the Western Balkans in terms of gender equality and women economic empowerment. So we really also believe, and I'm stopping here in a minute, that this integration actually of the gender-driven regional activities within the Berlin process framework will enable this due political spotlight that actually the agenda deserves and demands, and stronger actually commitment from the region to pursue the policies with gender lens. And in this respect, we could expect much more targeted activities which will yield concrete results next year, including the very imminent launch of the Western Balkans Women in STEM network that we are going to have early next year, as well as the publication of the very comprehensive assessment that we did in this area. So we reiterated a couple of times today, the situation in the region is indeed telling. So this points out to the need really to do more and engage more strongly. So we are happy to be starting today with you to make this change on this very important agenda for the overall human capital development trajectory of the region. And really, it is really our sincere hope that this reflection that COVID induced upon all of us in terms of what are the new sustainable development paradigm will put the spotlight on the human capital development as really an important agenda. So thanks again for the participation. Thanks for all the engagement. We really received very important inputs and concrete suggestions that will for sure take onward and they will further shape our work in the years to come. So thank you very much from my side, and Milena, I'm turning to you.
Yes, thank you, Maya. And it is indeed very encouraging to see how many practical ideas and proposals and next steps are already lining up. I would just, before closing formally and wishing everybody a very restful and pleasant weekend, I would just like to draw everybody's attention to the link which is now available in chat, where you can find the publication of this initiative, and remind yourselves or share it further with your colleagues and all any interested parties. The link will stay active in the chat, because now when we close, you will have again the opportunity to see the nice video which we saw at the beginning of the event. So thank you very much. It was really a pleasure for me to moderate this event. As a woman, as an expert, as a think tanker, in all my capacities, it was a real pleasure, and I wish RCC and UNDP a great success with this initiative, and I wish all of us to stay interested and informed to support it in any way that we can. Have a lovely weekend, have a lovely Friday evening, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.